Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Research Design. And today we're going to talk about causal identification. So this class will be separated in three parts. There will be two lecture video. One is about causation in general. So here we're going to understand the logic of causal identification. We're going to talk about three major elements which establish the foundation of causal identification, including correlation, intervention, and counterfactual. And in the second video, we are going to discuss randomized experiment and try to understand why randomized experiment is the so-called golden standard for causation testing or causal identification. And on the discussion board, you will have to practice your own skill on designing a randomized experiment. You can choose whatever topic that you want to study, and you would need to design a randomized experiment to identify the causal relationship between the treatment and the outcome. So let's get started. So to understand how we can identify the causality between two variables, or to identify the causal relationship between two variables, here I would borrow the framework, which is called the ladder of causation by Judea Pearl and Dana McKenzie in their book, which is called The Book of Why. So the first and the lowest ladder is association or correlation, where we see two variables changes simultaneously or in a sequence or in a pattern, like the simultaneous change of number of parrots and global temperature. So there's a very weird correlation between the number of parrots and the global temperature. So it seems like while the number of parrots is decreasing, the global temperature is going up. So there might be a positive, a net relationship between those two, right? So is that true? Well, that's a correlation. And why it is just a correlation, that is something we need to address today. So obviously there is a serious problem on the first ladder related to association and correlation, but that's a start point. It's a starting point, because if we didn't even see there's a correlation between two variables, then maybe it's just not relevant, right? So the correlation is a very important starting point of further causal identification, but that's definitely not enough. So the ladder of causation framework suggests that only after we go through all these steps that can we conclude whether there's a causal relationship between two variables. So what's the problem of the first ladder? And let's dig into that. You may want to think about what correlations that you want to test. You might see a lot of correlations embedded in narratives and stories on social media, or you might have encountered some correlations in your daily life, like why my partner's not happy today. Is that because I made really bad breakfast for her or him in this morning or not? You need to take action, right? When your partner is not very happy, then you need to figure out why he or she is not happy, and you want to fix the problem. And here you need to understand, okay, what's the problem? What leads to this kind of unhappiness? What's going on? And then you need to fix the problem. It might be correlation. You have tons of correlation, and what you're going to do is to figure out which one is the causal one, and then you need to fix that, because otherwise, even though no matter how tasty your breakfast in the future will be, then your partner will still not happy, because it's not a problem of the breakfast. Maybe it's your attitude, right? But if you have no partner, maybe you have other kind of correlation in your daily life. But that is something that we need to think about every day. We always try to find out which correlation is actually true, right? So you may have something in your mind right now, but example here I will raise is like this. So this is a chart, or this is a figure that you will have when you run data analysis. And from the logical model, what we can see here, it describes a potential causal relationship between our height and our earning, and also suggests that the taller we are, the more annual earning we're going to have. So we are paid depending on our height. It's a bad news for me as a short people. And partially, you can see the correlation in Seattle area because the average height of people in Seattle is much higher, it's much taller than other places, and people got paid more in Seattle area. So that's a correlation, right? And when you run the data, when you try to plot this kind of relationship, you can actually find a very clear linear relationship between people's height and their annual earning. And you can plot something like this. So this is the on the left, this is the graph we're going to have if you have the data of people's height and their annual earning. So what is that problem? What problem is that? The problem is we suspect if it's true or not, because it seems like there's no theoretical reason which can explain how people's height can lead to more earning or more or less earning, right? So last week we discussed a little bit about causal identification. There's definitely no way that we can draw a causal conclusion only based on data analysis. So that is why we need solid theory that help us to generate hypotheses that are worthwhile to test. So here, it seems like a hypothesis which is pretty stupid, right? We don't have very good understanding of the theoretical mechanism of height and earning. So our first job maybe is to identify whether this can be true, whether there's a causal relationship between height and earning. And then maybe we go back to the field to understand what is the causal mechanism. If we find no causal mechanism that can explain this causal relationship, then maybe we were wrong again. But still, we need to start from somewhere. So today, let's start with the factor that we only have data and we don't know the mechanism. So let's try to figure out whether it is causal or not. Okay. All right. So as I said, if we use a solid arrow in our logical model, we're assuming there's a causal relationship. It's very important because we don't actually test whether there's a correlation between two variables. There's always going to be some correlation, either stronger or smaller, right? So we test causal hypothesis. So here, if it's true, then the height of people's, whether you're tall or not, is the independent variable, or the cause, and earning is your outcome. And presumably there's a positive relationship, which means taller people get paid more, get paid more. One of the problem logically is that these two factors might not be relevant. And the reason why we are observing a seemingly positive relationship between two variables is because of another variable, which is what we call common cause. So one of the common causes in this case is gender, right? Being a male can be a common cause that influences both the height and the earning in our data. On average, male is taller than female, right? And on average, unfortunately, there's a substantial gender pay gap still in our society. So obviously, male are also paid more than female, right? So here we are observing two relationships where male has a positive relationship with height, and being a male has also a positive relationship with earning. So male is the major explaining variable here, and which leads to a simultaneous change or simultaneous increase of height and earning. In that case, the change of earning is not because of the change of height. Actually, the change of earning is because of the same reason that led to change of height. So in this case, gender, or being a male specifically, is a common cause that led to the simultaneous change of height and earning, which is missing from our original hypothesis. So this is one example of when correlation is not causation. Let's look at another case. So in this hypothesis, we look at two variables. First, the use of social media, and another is the level of political polarization. Some people suggest that it is the use of social media, or it is an increasing use of social media that leads to political polarization. Is that true? Yes, partially, because there are good theoretical reasons, and our experience also tell us that the more people rely on social media, the more they're going to become political polarized, because the algorithm of major social media always give them the thing that they want to read instead of the thing that they need to read, right? Think about those political extremists. They only read and share those opinions in articles that agree with their own viewpoint. Instead, they're going to ignore all other ideas and posts against their idea. And algorithm will give them more they like to read, which is something on their side, and that leads to political polarization, right? That seemingly this is true. We have a very good theoretical reason behind that. But let's think about opposite. Is that possible that political polarization also lead to more use of social media? You can think about this. One of the example is QAnon, people in the QAnon group. So one of the observations, there's a very interesting New York Times article in which the reporter actually joined, secretly in a QAnon Discord group and observing their conversation for 1 or 2 months. And from there, they find out that those QAnon believers, they are not, even though they're not alone, but they are actually isolated in their family. So they might be the only one that do believe that Donald Trump is, doing a lot of things, trying to save the United States, right? They are the only one who in the family that have this kind of belief. And other family members may say, okay, this person is crazy, I don't want to talk to him. So in this case, the only way that this person can find a shared understanding of some facts or have a shared identity is on social media. So the more they believe in those fake news and conspiracy theory, the more likely they're going to find similar people in social media, and they're going to be pushed away from the reality. And then, since they need to have a sense of community, they just try to confirm their belief. So they use more social media. So in this case, somehow political polarization will also lead to more use of social media, because that's the place they can find people who share their identities and share their beliefs. So they have more in common on social media than in the families. So maybe you don't agree with me, but I think it might be true, right? In the opposite way. So political polarization, more political polarization might also lead to more use of social media. And in this situation, this is what we call reverse causation. So here, the outcome in our original model is now the cause. And the cause in our original model becomes the outcome. And it can be true. And somehow, without any kind of manipulation, in reality, if we just have the data of people's usage of social media and the level of political polarization in the community, nobody tells us which one is true, which one is the cause, which one is the outcome, right? It's all based on our hypothesis. So here, either situation can be true, or both situations can be true. And it might coexists, right? So, and this is what we call simultaneity bias, which means both situations can be true. And from your data analysis, from your simple correlation analysis, you don't know which one is the cause, which one is the outcome. Since you have no idea which one is the cause, which one is the outcome, it is very unlikely that you can say, I understand there's a causal relationship between two variables because you don't know which one is the cause, which one is the outcome. It can both be true, right? So that is another situation when correlation is not causation, because to understand the causation, we need to understand which one is the cause, which one is the outcome. So in summary, we use the term endogeneity to cover the problem when correlation is not causation, especially to cover those two specific types. First is the problem of common cause, and another one is a problem of reverse causation or simultaneity bias, where we cannot identify which one is the outcome, which one is the cause. So in general, endogeneity means the situation in which the independent variable is caused partly by variables or processes that also affect the dependent variable. Remember, we term independent variable and dependent variable for a specific reason. We call the outcome as a dependent variable, and we call the cause as an independent variable. It is because the change, we assume the change of the cause, the change of the outcome, which is the dependent variable, is dependent on the change of the independent variable, which is the cause, right? So here, if the change of the cause or the change of the independent variable is partially influenced by the change of the dependent variable, which can be a reverse causation or a common cause, which also influences the dependent variable, the independent variable is no longer independent. The change of the independent variable is depending on the outcome, which is the dependent variable. It sounds pretty tricky, right? It also confuses us about how to understand the causal relationship between two variables. So in this situation, when we can see, or when we can actually identify there might be some common cause, or that explain the simultaneous change of those two variables, or maybe if we have solid reason to believe there might be a reverse causation compared to the original model, then it's a problem of endogeneity because the independent variable is no longer independent. It's in the system of the change of the dependent variable. So in this situation, we say the independent variable x is endogenous to dependent variable y. And when we see a reverse causation or common cause. So the term opposite to endogeneity is what we call exogeneity, which means the change of x is independent or comes from an external force, which is independent from y. Okay. Let's use two quick questions to understand these situations. The first question, a study forcefully concluded that eating ice cream causes drowning because both increase during the summer month. In fact, the warm weather leads people to go swimming more often, leading to more death due to drowning. And the more people eat ice cream as temperature rises. It's a common sense, right? So the correct explanation is called common cause. So obviously, the warmer weather or the rise of the temperature is the common cause that leads to the change of consumption of ice cream and the change of drowning cases. So in this way, the warm weather is a common cause. So which helps us to understand, okay, there's no causal relationship between ice cream and drowning if there's no other good reason to believe that eating ice cream will likely to make people crazy and go drowning in the swimming pool. Okay, so this is a typical example of common cause. Another one. So this is quite interesting. So a visitor to Earth from another planet noticed that people started to buy lighter clothing such as t-shirts and sandals. After weeks later, the temperature increased. The visitor concluded that shopping caused a change of weather. The error is called reverse causation because we are as we are living on the earth, we know what's going on. But this is not a science fictional example. This is actually pretty true. Usually we make assumption, we make a causal assumption or causal conclusion based on the sequence of events, and that is actually one of the way that a movie director use, which is to change the order of scenes so that they mislead viewers, they mislead audience, right? So we have seen so many of these in those movie trailers, which surprised us a little bit, but then we find out it is not true. That is just the artistry of editing. So in reality, our research, sometimes we also assume that the sequence of the events matters, and what's happening first will lead to what's happening next. But actually, it might not be true, right? So we need to think about theoretical reason why one event will lead to the other. What's the causal mechanism? Here on the Earth, we know the causal mechanism, right? Actually, we are someone in this setting, and we know the reason why we want to purchase more lighter clothing. So sometimes we don't know the causal mechanism, and that is where qualitative method can help. In this case, this is obviously a reverse causation problem. Maybe consuming more lighting clothing will lead to higher temperature. Maybe that's one of the problems of global warming. We don't know, but obviously there's another way around. Both of them can be true, but that's still a problem of endogeneity. So yeah, that's the case. That's another typical case of endogeneity. So far, we understand that correlation is not enough. Correlation might be misleading because the cause might not be the cause, and the change of the cause and outcome might be because of another common cause, right? So how do we address this problem? One strategy that we need to use is to move upward on the ladder of causation. We move to the second level, which is intervention. Let's think about this reverse causation or simultaneity bias case. The use of social media can be a cause, or it can also be a outcome. So what should we do? And also the height and earning. The height can be influenced by male, and so we actually don't know what if male is being controlled. What if the gender is something we consider, and what's going on, what's going to happen if we take the gender under consideration, right? So the strategy here is intervention, which means we manipulate the change. We make the change on the variable that we want to look at. For example, for the first relationship, if we assume that, okay, in this case, we just want to look at if we think the use of social media is the cause, and we consider political polarization as the outcome, let's make the change. Let's change the use of social media intentionally. So in this case, this is the cause. We cause the change of social media. So the change of social media is no longer because of political polarization, even though that still exists. But we can identify the extent to which we made a change. When we change one variable, then that's the cause. And we observe the outcome. We observe the change of outcome according to our change of the cause. Okay? And also, the same logic applied to the second relationship between height and earning. Instead of just relying on the effect of male, let's change the height a little bit. And then let's see how that will lead to a change of earning. So in this case, the change of height is not because of the gender, it's because of us. So here we know that we can actually isolate the effect so that we can see if there's any kind of causal effect on height, on earning. You might think about maybe it is not something we're gonna do because there's no way for me to change my height. But if we think about a causal mechanism, we can do that, but we will discuss that later on. But the question here is intervention enough? We make the change of social media, and the change of social media leads to a change of political polarization. That's possible. However, what if there's other factors that is stronger than us? Or what if the change of social media does not lead to the change of political polarization? But in reality, there are other factors that influence political polarization, which we didn't observe, right? It can be the Congress. It can be a debate on the Congress that lead to political polarization. It can be some misleading education, which lead to political polarization. These are the things that we didn't, we can hardly observe, but still happen. So in this case, even though there's no relationship between the use of social media and the political polarization, we still observe the change of political polarization, which is not because of our intervention. It's because of other factors that we don't know. So how should we know? How should we isolate the effect of the use of social media, right? So in this case, intervention might not be enough. But in our mind, in our brain, we do have a system that can help us to make such kind of inference. Somehow we know how to judge whether the effect is true or not. But we just don't realize that. We just don't know how to operationalize that in our program evaluation or research design. But I will show you that you do have this kind of capacity in your mind. Let's watch this video. Sorry, I need to share sound.
Spider-Man! Oh my God, this is it! Tell everyone to hang on! Brace yourself! Any more bright ideas? I got a few. Yeah. Watch out! We're slowing down.
Okay, Spider-Man, the good friend of our community. He might get super strength, super power to stop the train, right? But he might not be the only person who can do that. let's watch the following video.
I can't stop it! The brakes are gone!
Okay, you might be laughing here. It's funny because you know the second video is not true, right? And the reason you believe it's not true is actually in your mind, but I'm gonna tell you specifically. So here, let's start from the intervention. In both video, we can see an intervention, right? The Spider-Man trying to stop the train, and this guy was also trying to stop and push the train, and they intervened, right? They actually did that. But why we know that the second one is not true? It is because we have the capacity to imagine what's going to happen if there's no such kind of intervention. We know that if the man doesn't touch the train will still go and stop, right? That is the essence of causal identification. And this is on the third level of the ladder of causation, which is called counterfactuals. There's so many variables that confound our understanding of the causal relationship. And those variables sometimes are observable, but most of the cases they are non-observable. But that is something that influences the outcome, but we just don't know, or we just can't control them. But they exist. And that explains a lot of our current world change. So in order to understand what exactly is the effect of our cause, of our intervention on the outcome, we need to consider the counterfactual, which is what would happen if a different course of action or no action has been taken. For example, there are a lot of counterfactual questions, and that is actually in our rational mind. For example, would the COVID-19 outbreak in the United States if China closed its border in January 2020? Here, you might think about what is the effect of closing the border early on spread of COVID-19, right? And this is a causal relationship, and this is the counterfactual question we need to consider if we want to understand the effect of closing the border, of closing border. The second question, would the current situation of the pandemic be better if Donald Trump was not the president? And here we're estimating the presidency's effect on the control of COVID-19, right? And this question might not apply for my situation right now, but previously I might ask, would I still be single if I did not spend my time pursuing a PhD, right? And that's how PhD influences our life. So if you're interested in doing research, you need to consider seriously what's the cost of doing a PhD. And you need to understand that controlling other factors and isolating the effect of being a PhD by asking this counterfactual question. Okay, so the counterfactual is a situation where the only difference is the cause or the treatment, and other things should be held constantly or consistently. So in this case, you can consider counterfactuals as a time machine, as we consider how should we use a time machine in our first class. So in your first class, I asked you the question, if you have a time machine and we're going to change in the past, if you can change one thing. So the assumption here is the counterfactual. You actually change something in a counterfactual, and you might also consider the current world as a counterfactual, and you change one thing in the past and expect something might change in your current situation. So in a time machine, everything is the same except the change you made. You can also think about a counterfactual as parallel universe. So there's a bunch of theory about parallel universe. For example, if we consider our reality, and there will be another parallel universe compared to our reality where I'm not teaching this class, where you are not watching the lecture here, but you are doing something else, and all other kind of stuff is the same, right? So they can be infinite number of counterfactuals or parallel universe, where the only difference is something that you change in this universe, but other stuff will maintain the same. So you can think about Doctor Strange and how he navigated tons of parallel universe and only find out one situation where the Avengers can actually win the game. So yeah, that's another key example. To help you better understand the notion of counterfactual, here's another video from my favorite movie, Groundhog Day.
So, what are the chances of getting out today?
The van still won't start. Larry's working on it.
Wouldn't you know it? Can I buy you a drink?
Okay.
Jim Beam, ice, water.
For you, miss?
Sweet vermouth and the rocks with a twist, please.
What are the chances of getting out of town today?
The van still won't start. Larry's working on it.
Oh, wouldn't you know it? Can I buy you a drink?
Okay.
Sweet vermouth, rocks with a twist, please.
For you, miss?
The same. That's my favorite drink.
Mine, too. It always makes me think of Rome. The way the sun hits the buildings in the afternoon.
Well, what should we drink to?
To the groundhog.
I always drink to world peace.
Can I buy you a drink?
Okay.
Sweet vermouth, rocks with a twist, please.
For you, miss?
The same. That's my favorite drink.
Mine, too. It always makes me think of Rome. The way the sun hits the buildings in the afternoon.
Well, what should we drink to?
I like to say a prayer and drink to world peace.
To world peace.
World peace.
Okay, you need to keep everything the same except the thing that you want to change so that you can see the real effect of the change. Okay, so that is the major essence of a counterfactual. So in conclusion, to identify a causal relationship between two variables, we need to go through all the three levels of ladder in this system. We need to identify, we need to have some evidence of correlation first. And then, since we want to understand what's the true effect of the cause, we need to pick up the cause and change that intentionally. And that is where intervention comes in. And finally, we need to compare two realities. One is the situation where we actually intervene the system. And when you think about the counterfactual, where everything remains the same except our intervention. Only by this kind of comparison can we understand what is the true effect of our intervention and whether there's any kind of causal relationship between the cause and the outcome. And after going through all three ladders, we address the problem of endogeneity. And here we can actually see the real effect of our cause on our outcome.